All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for having us at this meeting today or this gathering for conversation. It's really great to be a part of this. And we just wanted to join you folks today to talk a little bit about chimney swifts. So before we get into that, me and my colleague will just say that my name's Claire Marshall. My pronouns are she, they. I come to Birds Canada with a background in kind of all sorts of things, which really show my love for biodiversity. I've worked with turtles in Florida. I've worked with bees in Montana, fishes here in Ontario. And my dream, though, has always been working with birds. So I'm really excited this summer to be focusing on chimney swifts, a really special species. And we'll definitely get into that. But before that, I'll let Gabriel introduce himself as well.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm Gabriel. It's a pleasure to be here. Like Claire said, my pronouns are he, him. And no, it's super exciting to be working with Birds Canada this season. I've been working with species at risk here in Ontario for 3 years now. But this is my first time specializing in ornithology, and it's awesome. It's so spectacular to be focused on the species of the chimney swift, which we're really happy to talk to you about today. And we're going to give you a kind of a very brief overview of the work that Birds Canada is doing with them, as well as why they're a unique species worth conserving.
All right, before we get started, we'll just do another land acknowledgement. I know we've already had a brief one already from Autumn, but it's something that, we could definitely use more of in our lives. So here's Birds Canada's land acknowledgement, and it is that Birds Canada understands that Indigenous voices, knowledge, and ongoing work on the land are critical for wild birds to thrive and sustainable ecosystems. We support the needs, aspirations, and rights of Indigenous peoples to care for the land. And before I'll turn to the next page, you can just get a brief image of this chimney swift, a really beautiful drawing of a chimney swift at his nest. So, but before we talk about chimney swifts too much farther, I'll also just introduce Birds Canada to you folks. Although I'm pretty sure a lot of people already know a lot about Birds Canada, even before I moved to Toronto several years ago for my environmental science program. Birds Canada was on my radar and has been on my radar. We're a longstanding charitable nonprofit that focuses not only on scientific research, but also, just like a lot of other conservation programs, we also value and have learned the importance of having community engagement, relationships within the community, to promote science-based advocacy, sound science-based advocacy within municipalities, and creating policies that are going to be better supported with science to protect species that we really care about and species that need us because they're under decline or threatened. And we also do that through on the ground conservation actions. Good examples of that, are our piping plover monitoring, whether it's piping plovers in Ontario or chimney swifts in Halifax. We have a broad range of on-the-ground actions to conserve species at risk. And there's a lot of exciting things going on in Birds Canada. It's truly a joy. I can't tell you how much of a joy it is to be a part of the nonprofit. And I'm really excited for this summer. And I'm really excited to share with you folks a little bit of information about chimney swifts. So I haven't included any text here yet, and that is because I know it's sometimes very hard to speak up in these Zoom meetings, and I know there's a lot going on, but I would love for other people to, join in and see if there's anything in particular in these photos that stands out to anyone. If you can try to find any kind of characteristic that might make them unique that you wouldn't see in other species. What is it about chimney swifts that make them so special? And you can get some good hints from these photos alone. So does anyone have any ideas? I promise it's not that scary if we want to speak up.
I will say that back talon looks a little peculiar to me. It's an interesting adaptation.
That's so true. Yeah, just like thank you, Gabriel. That was kind of cheating. It's kind of cheating, but that is true. They have very short legs, but these big like claws for gripping these vertical surfaces. Actually, chimney swifts are not capable of standing horizontal. So you wouldn't see them perching, you know, on a telephone wire. You wouldn't see them perching on a tree branch like you'd see usually other species of birds. They just have to be, my joke is all summer I'm going to make it so that it's not funny anymore. But my joke is that they have to be clinging on for their life in order to be able to see or to sit kind of what their version is of upright. So that is one of the unique characteristics. And another unique characteristic is you can see on the back of their tail, it's not very long, it's quite a short tail, but it has these thick-ended, these thick plumages that they use to actually, if you could compare it to a woodpecker, they have the similar tail feathers, but they use those to connect to like a vertical surface and as a support whenever they're leaning on these vertical surfaces. So that those are really good underlying characteristics of chimney swifts. They also live most of their life in the air or on the wing, as we say it in the birding in the birding community. They are foraging in the air. They're, you know, catching insects. They are getting twigs in the air. They're not, you know, spending a lot of time not in the air for most of their life. They do have a very it's almost a little bit is the word misconceiving? I can't think of the word here. Deceiving. Is it deceiving? It looks a little bit like tricky, but they actually have a large bill compared to their very small, seemingly small bill. They have a large mouth that opens up really wide, and they've been known to eat over 1,000 insects a day. So they're almost like the whales of the bird of the bird world in that same way that they can open up their mouth and eat a lot of bugs at one time. And whenever you're camping, the next time you're, you know, at the campground and you're getting eaten by black flies or mosquitoes or any other kind of, you know, bugs that are biting you, you can thank chimney swifts for helping control insect populations and keep them at bay. So that's just one example of why they're such an important species. Does anyone know, can anyone recognize any of these species in the photos above? The two photos on the bottom are chimney swifts. So I'll give that one away, but can anyone guess what the photos above the chimney swifts are? If you were talking, Jamie, I think it is. I don't think I could hear you because you were on mute. That's okay.
We got Sarah in the chat.
Myself, tree swallows.
Yeah, awesome. What did Sarah in the chat say?
Also swallows.
Awesome. Did someone raise their hand? You could totally speak up.
Yeah, that was me. These all look like aerial insectivore species. You've got bank swallows, tree swallows, cliff swallows, barn swallows, birds that eat insects in flight.
Oh my gosh, exactly. You said it with a lot more class than I think I could have said. So good job. Thank you guys so much for speaking up. That's exactly right. Yeah, those are all swallow species. So Gabriel and I were actually out paddle birding yesterday, paddle boarding and looking for birds. And one of the big questions people had were how to tell the difference between swallows and swifts. We were fortunate enough on the Toronto Islands to see chimney swifts yesterday. And we also saw a lot of swallows as well out there. So of course people were like, how can I tell the difference? They're all flying really fast, zooming through the air. And one really good way to think about it is that chimney swifts, this has been, the analogy has been made and I can no longer unsee it. They look like a boomerang with a bird in the middle, or a cigar. Some people call them the cigar-shaped birds. So I found that to be pretty accurate. That's very boomerang-esque type of shape that they have. So if they're a boomerang, then it's probably a chimney swift. But if the wings are a bit, you know, thicker and they're more connected to the latter part of their body, then that's probably going to be a swallow. But they are all very fast and eating bugs in the air, like aerial insectivores do. So a little bit about their life history. You know, someone like my grandma asked me, and it's definitely a question I anticipate getting more of, is, you know, where were they before they were in the chimneys? They mustn't have always occupied chimneys, and that is true. So previously, whenever we still had, of course, old growth forests, they would use these hollowed out trees as a nesting cavity. You can see these photos side by side and see, yeah, that looks pretty similar. Actually, you have, somewhere where you can enter and build a nest safely and be away from any kind of predators. And chimneys were another great vertical surface that would replace these old growth forests whenever colonization came and urbanization increased, and we took away their natural habitat. And that's one of the reasons they depend more on chimneys and artificial and human-made infrastructure now, as opposed to these old growth forests. So something that's going on in here, it does look a little eerie or ominous, but it's actually a very wholesome roosting activity, which is happening earlier on in the migratory season. The photo in the middle is what has been called a Swiftnado, which is like, Shark Week, the version of Shark Week, or Shark Week version of birding. That's whenever a bunch of birds, sometimes hundreds, thousands of them, are flying together and they're all entering a chimney. And they're just kind of hanging out together. They're not nesting at this point in time. They're still, in the process of migrating and going to, their final destination where they'll spend the summer months. And you see that happening a lot more in these earlier summer months or late spring months. Like you'll see that in April. That's when it starts to begin, well into May. And then just at the very beginning of June, we actually had national roost monitoring dates that just ended, sadly. Really cute way to get the community out to see if any chimney swifts are roosting in their neighborhoods. And then towards July and the in-between months, they are actually nesting, and you'll start to see that roosting behavior again as they head back to South America, Central America, where they're spending their winter months. I'll just try to share real quick the computer sound so that you folks can hear. I have a video actually from an event that I'll talk about a little later at Moss Park for this year. And this is an example of a roosting event. Is everyone here? Awesome. So they're kind of faking you out at first and just flying around and doing their final foraging, and then boom, you can see them dive into the chimney. Here's a little bit of a different view. Crazy. It looks like, when there's a bunch of insects flying around, and the air's just so dense and thick with them. So it's a really spectacular sight to see. Oh, now we're gonna see both videos at the same time, make a mixtape out of it. Awesome. Yeah. So like I said, in between those roosting activities and the times whenever they're the time in between migratory season, they're actually nesting. So you'll see them come in and out of the nest or in and out of a chimney throughout the day, and they're bringing twigs and sticks and nest building behaviors, and they're also bringing food to their young whenever they have a successful nest. And I have another question about what do you folks think is keeping up these twigs on this vertical surface? Does anyone have any idea what the chimney swifts are doing? Are they going to a dollar store and buying some glue? What's happening there?
I won't say anything because Natasha has already told me, so I don't want to give the answer.
That's okay. Thank you for trying. Anyone else?
Diana in the chat has tuned in with saliva ?
Absolutely. Yay, Diana. I'm so proud. Thank you, Diana. I knew someone was gonna have a guess, and that's totally right. They're actually using their glue-like saliva. That makes me thirsty just thinking about it. So yeah, they have this really special ability to, I'm not sure what it looks like exactly in theory, but the special ability to have, saliva like glue, or glue like saliva, and connect these twigs and build a really beautiful nest on these vertical surfaces that, seem to be doing a good job at keeping these nests safe. They have on average about 4 eggs per nest, and usually I think the average is around 3 of those end up being fledging successfully. And this is just a final wrap up of the species spotlight. This is a great graph. It's really helpful that shows, the different months where they're coming in from South America, Central America, and where they're laying claim for the summer months and hanging out in these warmer temperatures in this beautiful land of Eastern Canada. And they start heading back closer to the end of August, September, October, November, and they don't come around again until March and April. And that is a little bit of the species spotlight for the chimney swift. I'm going to hand the ball over to Gabriel now, who's going to talk about a few sadder parts of the chimney swift.
Yes, I'm going to be the one to switch gears to a little bit more of the doom and gloom, but don't worry, guys, there's hope. So we're going to kind of shift into talking about the conservation status of chimney swifts and all of the threats that they face as a species. So while we've kind of been talking about chimney swifts in like very specific detail through a species highlight, we're now going to kind of take a step back and talk about this figure in more general senses. Like while some families of birds are doing well and even increasing, aerial insectivores are one of the most at-risk groups of birds. As you can see from this chart, since the 1970s, there's been a very high population decrease. In fact, they're the lowest on the figure at 50. I think they have it as 59% decrease. I think in Canada we've even chalked it up to a 90. Is it 70 or 90% decrease? Claire, do you remember?
For aerial insectivores, I'm
No,
not
just
sure.
for chimney swifts, I think.
It's a 90% decrease
Yeah.
since 1970.
Yeah. That's what I thought. Anyways,
That's what it says.
yes, that's what it is. And the Canadian population is now estimated to be between 2,000 and 70,000 mature birds, and they really hit like a diverse array of threats. In general, aerial insectivores have faced a severe decrease and an estimated 59% decrease in Canada, but particular chimney swifts are hit more difficult with more difficulties than other species. Globally, they're listed as vulnerable, but in Canada, they're listed as threatened species with an endangered status in the province of Nova Scotia. So there's a need for immediate action in order to save them and help stop this decrease of their numbers. But there's major contributing factors, as we can see on this slide, rather than just one overarching cause. So through this image, we've got a few kind of visual aids to kind of get us in the headspace, but we'll be diving into them all kind of specifically. So the first and foremost is these are all kind of factors that affect aerial insectivores as a whole. I should start with that. But if it affects aerial insectivores, it also clearly affects chimney swifts. And like most things, it's an interconnected system of issues. So when the food chain is affected, our first threat is the aerial insect decline. So as you can imagine, as food disappears, it's harder for the species to feed themselves and their young, which leads to starvation, poor nesting success, and death. Aerial insectivore decline is thought to be caused by a combination of widespread pesticide use and climate change, although there's so many contributing factors, and we're only really starting to scratch the surface on what is affecting this population decline of insect biodiversity. There's also a mismatch between insect emergence and bird arrival. Both birds and insects are kind of sensitive to changes in climate patterns. And just one example of this is the differences in weather patterns that can cause insects to emerge at different times after the winter. And this comes with like extreme temperature variation. Birds traveling all the way from South America rely on the first insects to regain their strength after the long journey, like Claire mentioned before. So when there's no food or they miss the initial emergence of the insects, the timing can really affect their ability to have a successful nesting season or even a successful migration. Birds coming from South America can't always check the weather reports and know to migrate early or wait a little bit. So they get stuck in these situations where they're expecting to be able to recharge and continue their like journey, but they get stuck without any food and end up missing a lot of important nutrients. And that leads us to the next section, which is climate change. Climate change can also cause an increased frequency in weather, like severe weather events, as I'm sure everyone is aware, especially right now. And these kind of weather events also affect aerial insectivores and chimney swifts as well, as they're specifically chimney swifts are pretty much 100% aerial species. They really rely on like calm weather in order to be able to forage. Like when we go survey, our best nights for observations are when there's low winds and high visibility and not much cloud cover, because that's when it's the best for the insects. But things like storms can cause birds to be killed or blown off course during migration, can kill their eggs, chicks, and even the adults. So it reduces breeding success and can make migration more difficult. And things like the forest fires going on right now, while there's not much science investigating the effects, like Claire and I have incidentally observed more lethargic behavior and less foraging activities these past weeks with the air pollution. And then lastly, like most things, chimney swifts are heavily impacted by habitat loss and degradation. As we've already kind of talked about in their species biology and behavior, they historically used to roost in natural cavities, whether that was caves or hollow trees, that we've kind of since removed as we urbanized and colonized Canada. So now they've adjusted to use industrial chimneys for roosting and personal chimneys for nesting. And now we're kind of doing it again, whereas we modernize for ourselves, we're affecting their habitat, because now with electric heating and other ways of keeping homes warm, there's not really a need to build brick chimneys the way we used to. And a lot of the chimneys that they have since pivoted to rely on are now at risk of being demolished or have been demolished, again, reducing their habitat loss, leaving them with nowhere to go. Yeah, so this is kind of the example of that. Like they've already lost their home range of large dead trees, and it's happening again now. So many chimneys that were suitable for swifts in the 1960s or earlier are no longer accessible, not just because of demolishing, but there's also new practices that weren't always in effect, like chimney lining and capping, where we're altering chimneys to make them less accessible to raccoons or more resilient to the elements of the weather. And this is really unnecessary. It's kind of like it does the job, but it doesn't necessarily take the bigger picture into effect. It's excessive, and chimney swifts are now getting cut off from historical sites that they would return to. I would say that currently the number of chimneys right now isn't really what's causing chimney swifts. Like the major issue that we are working on, Claire and I, is kind of monitoring these chimneys and figuring out which ones are still usable and how we can protect them, because the presence of chimneys that are usable for swifts, both for nesting and for roosting, is kind of an integral part of their conservation, especially in our urban environments.
Yeah, awesome. So I'll take over the talking baton again to talk about the aerial insectivore conservation program with Birds Canada. So I'm kind of playing the good cop again, introducing the species, and then now talking about, well, okay, this is what we're trying to do to combat all those threats that Gabriel just mentioned. And, while some of those are definitely out of our control, like, I think there was some kind of statistic that mentioned there's a 40% global decline in insect populations. And from things like climate change to pesticide use. So while those things are definitely something that is a much bigger issue at hand, there are some ways that we can, work directly with our environment, our built environment and natural habitats to improve the lives of and success, for that matter, of aerial insectivores like the chimney swifts. We don't just focus on chimney swifts with Birds Canada. We also do, Natasha, the Ontario field biologist, is also here. And she'll definitely participate more in like the question and answer section, but she also works with, nightjars. We also work with swallows. So chimney swifts are one, not smaller part, but an integral part of a much bigger program of aerial insectivore conservation. And similar to what we saw with Birds Canada's, the way that we're carrying out the mission of conserving bird populations, you'll see a lot of the kind of repeat ideas of monitoring populations. I had a professor at some point in college that said you can't protect what you don't know is there, or you don't know what you don't know. And so that goes into why we care and focus so much on monitoring populations and knowing how they're doing. We wouldn't get these great graphs. Well, they're not so great if they're showing the decline of species, but it is important to know how they're doing. And we wouldn't get that information if people weren't on the ground each year, seeing how species are either growing ideally or in many cases, unfortunately, declining in population size. So we do focus each year on monitoring populations of species. We also focus on supporting and encouraging stewards. A lot of the times, Gabriel and I are very lucky to have a job with Birds Canada and be aerial insectivore technicians, field technicians. But this, this kind of citizen science is usually run with the help and in bulk from the public and from people that care, that aren't getting paid. They're not on the payroll. They're just people that have a really beautiful heart and want to do their best to be good stewards to the environment. So we're trying to encourage people. A lot of the times people just don't know how to help out and how to be better environmental stewards, especially to something like a chimney swift that has very specific needs. And people don't even realize they're in their very home, their next door neighbor sometimes. So we are focusing on, that showing up and supporting the community, engaging with the community, and also engaging with agriculture and industry, and promoting these beneficial practices that will hopefully lead to, the conservation of these threatened bird species. And chimney swifts, particularly, the way we do that with chimney swifts is through a community organization called Swiftwatch, or a community-based citizen science program called Swiftwatch. The program goals for Swiftwatch are to monitor the chimney swift population and know where they are present, where they're roosting, what are their numbers, to locate nest and roost sites, and supporting stewardship and facilitating that research to go on and make better decisions for chimney swifts, and support, something like the recovery strategy for chimney swifts whenever they are being monitored by organizations like COSEWIC, or COSEWIC's not, I guess, an organization, but a gathering like COSEWIC that is all working together to see what species are at risk and what actions we need to take to protect them. So what's next for this summer 2023? What are Gabriel and I up to other than yapping to you guys and talking to you guys about chimney swifts? Well, one of our main focuses for this summer is monitoring. And, as field biologists, that's something that Gabriel and I both have had experience with, albeit not with chimney swifts. So it's been really exciting to get a map together. I worked with sea turtles. Gabriel's worked with turtles, right? Other kinds of turtles and herps. But this is the first time that I think our fieldwork looks like this map, where we're actually in a big city like Toronto and going out to residential areas and sometimes, big commercial buildings, and staring at a building in a city until the sun goes down, and half an hour after the sun goes down to see if there's any kind of chimney swift presence at those sites. We're working to update 88 plus sites in Western Toronto. The plus is very ambitious. It started as 50, but we are trying to update as many as we can. And we're ambitious that we will be able to hit up all these sites and see if there's still chimney swift activity there. For some of them, it's been several years that they've been visited. And so it could be that these populations have changed. So we want to, that goes back to you can't protect what you don't know. So we want to go back and make sure this information is as up to date as possible to see where chimney swifts are still in the city of Toronto. And this is just a photo of me, if you can see it. My name is Claire. I think I mentioned that. And this is on St. Clair Avenue. So I thought it was pretty meta, I guess. Pretty cool. Claire on St. Clair. And this is actually my first week of monitoring. And we ended up seeing 2 chimney swifts go in these chimneys. So I thought it was a perfect night to get to see the swifts go into the chimney. Perfect weather conditions. And I liked that I shared the name with the with the street that I was monitoring. So another way that another project that we're focusing on, it's not just monitoring for us, and it's not just research. We're also, trying to provide outreach to the community. This meeting is an example of, one of those outreach ideas and how to get more involved. We dove right into it. It was a very swift response to outreach, because our 3rd day with Birds Canada just a couple weeks ago actually we had a great event that we got to be a part of, the Swift Night Out. We had over 100 participants, something like 130. And we actually had to see, I think, over 600 plus roosting chimney swifts. And that was the video that I got to show a little bit earlier of the roosting activity. And this is just a very cute pictures of Natasha showing off our swift friendly chimney swift sign that cites if they have an active chimney swift nest and they're taking measures to protect it, they can get one of these signs and show off to everyone that's passing by, hey, you know, our library or our residential house is a chimney swift friendly habitat, and hopefully create conversation in communities because of it. And we also have a picture of Gabriel showing off some really cool chimney swift outreach material. Really great event, and we're hoping to be able to do a little bit more like this summer.
That was a perfect segue. That was great. Yeah, so we are hoping to keep doing more and more outreach, just because, as Claire has said perfectly, you can't protect what you don't know. And chimney swifts are in this really unique situation where their critical habitat is so much private land. It's all about getting the communities to which these chimneys inhabit to know that they're there and how they're functioning and how they're using people's private spaces, and then to convince them that they're worth protecting, because a lot of people don't even know that these birds are in their chimneys until after they talk to us and go look for themselves. So some of these next projects for the summer that we're working on is to just find other ways to innovate and get community members involved with chimney swift monitoring through programs like Swiftwatch, or even just recreationally. So one of these ideas is to work with some local libraries. Birds Canada is in the process of spearheading a program to promote general birding with bird kits accessible in libraries. And we're working to ensure that chimney swift educational resources will be included in these kits so that people can have a really interesting species at risk to kind of target right off the bat as they're learning how to bird. And when the libraries themselves are in these neighborhoods that have chimney swift observations, like Claire has done some research into some of our known locations for potential outreach events, and some libraries themselves have chimneys that have historically been used as rooster nest sites. So it's this really good kind of home base of engagement that we're going to try and work with. Another one of those is parks. Similar to the Moss Park event, there's lots of parks, especially in Toronto, our place of focus, where there are historical chimney swift observations. And in weather, when the weather's nice and it's not as polluted as it is right now, it's great to get people outside, especially in the evenings after everyone's had a long day at work. And chimney swifts are just at sunset, so it's this lovely evening event that we're going to continue to try and work through as the month of June goes by before they stop nesting in chimneys. And we're also working with Bird Safe UFT on an outreach event on campus in Toronto, as they've been working really hard to monitor their chimneys on campus, and they've found 3 sites that confirmed have chimney swifts in them this season. And we're hoping that we can get more students involved and more students in understanding what's going on their campus and in their communities, because there's so many environmental students that I'm sure would love to see that their campus and their home is a place for species at risk, and then they'll continue to carry on the journey of advocating on their behalf and working to conserve the properties. And that kind of leads us to the more general big scale update that we're working on for the Swiftwatch program, which is the Adopt a Chimney program. We're trying to make the process of chimney monitoring a lot more streamlined for our volunteers, because we've got so many dedicated people who are ready to go look for chimneys for us. I remember my first week getting email access. I was overwhelmed by the number of requests to get involved. And there's not really an automated process for that yet, where they can access the same maps that we do and know what chimneys need to be monitored, or what chimneys are missing data in the past couple of years. So we're hoping to streamline that process and make chimney swift monitoring citizen science that much more accessible to everyone. And that kind of leads into kind of the bigger goal here is we're trying our best to collect as much data as possible across the country for what chimneys are currently active critical habitat, so that we can then bring that data and do some good with it. And a lot of that is going to come from working with municipalities and other forms of government. As we briefly mentioned, in the past, we've worked with the federal government for funding processes to restore or conserve chimneys through the Chimney Swift Fund, that is a partnership between Birds Canada and many other governments. But unfortunately, like a lot of conservation networks this year, the funding stream kind of has had an interruption. And now we're working to kind of proactively stop chimneys from being demolished rather than working to restore them once they're gone. So we're really hoping to kind of get the ball rolling by requesting, but by asking, how can we incorporate our data and our understanding of critical habitats for species at risk into permits for chimney deconstruction and historical site alterations? And that all comes from conversations like these. And it's great to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, that's a good segue. Speaking of getting the ball rolling. This is where the conversation kind of becomes more leaning into, well, just that, a conversation, and not just Gabriel and I, talking about chimney swifts and their threats and what we can do to conserve them, because, one of those priorities that we talked about earlier are collaborations with other organizations and within the community. So, I mean, what better collaboration would there be than to to collaborate on a bird-friendly city initiative? It's a really beautiful program that Nature Canada is working on, and I hope you folks enjoy my little Birds Canada to Nature Canada reference, because it seems like a lot of our missions and goals for conservation and protecting native lands and native animals, it really is well aligned. So what we'd love to talk about is really how to best do that, especially with chimney swifts conservation and aerial insectivore conservation. And I hope you folks enjoy Gabriel's I Want You for Chimney Conservation. Gabriel is a great graphic designer and always comes up with some really great things to look at. So taking a look at the Bird Friendly City certification application, I mean, you folks probably know a lot more about this, having actually, been a part of the process of coming up, of applying to be a bird friendly city, or the folks that are actually in charge of running the Bird Friendly City certification program. But just taking a brief look at what that entails, I just saw some great parts of this application where, if folks are saying that, they want to know more about how to have protected area policies, or if they want to know more about how to address the disturbance of birds at not only natural areas, but I loved the or important bird habitat a part of the application, because, chimney swifts are a very unique case in that they're not actually in some conservation lands. They're in our homes. They're our next door neighbors. So conserving this threatened species actually means meeting them where they're at, which is right here in our very house. So it couldn't be easier really to meet them where they're at in that case. So there's a lot of great wording, a lot of great opportunities, I think, for our Swiftwatch data to be incorporated in our other resources within the Swiftwatch program, to be incorporated to share with policymakers and municipalities and people that are actually writing permits for construction projects. If we have a more streamlined process of sharing this data, it'd be so helpful to take a more proactive response to chimney swift conservation, as opposed to any kind of reactionary response where people are maybe getting a fine for harming critical habitat or destroying critical habitat of a threatened species. We want it to be as good of an experience as possible, conservation, and make people feel good so that they actually care about the species that they're conserving, and not just caring about fines or any kind of the negative aspects of harming critical habitat or taking away from critical habitat. And another really important section that I could see where chimney swift aligns with the bird friendly city application and how to be a bird friendly city companion guide. I really loved this section too for habitat restoration, protection, and climate resiliency, and particularly 2.8 that talks about the focus of stopover and nesting habitat protection. With chimney swifts, it feels like, and with all migratory species for that matter, we have a special innate reciprocity, I think, that's expected. If other countries and other states in the US perhaps are taking measures to protect chimney swifts or to protect migratory species, the most we can do is here on our land is make sure that they're accommodated to for the 3-4 months that they're actually here. It's such a short amount of time, and there's so much room to improve upon our relationship with chimney swifts and migratory species, and making sure that after traveling thousands of miles or kilometers, actually having a safe place to call home once they get here. Like, imagine taking a big round or big trip to across the world to, I don't know, maybe somewhere in Europe or Australia, and your friend was going to pick you up from the airport and everything was planned out, and you did the same trip last year and it was the best time of your life and you had the best food ever, and then you got there and your friend didn't get you at the airport and her number's no longer working and you're just so discombobulated and don't know where to go. This is the case for a lot of species that are migratory and have their habitat destroyed, particularly with chimney swifts that do show some loyalty to the site where they are returning to each year. So anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent, but an important one at that. And just kind of wrapping up, our part of this conversation is, we have a lot of really great resources, from pamphlets that have been designed by people that are wanting to help folks understand, capped or uncapped chimneys and what does that mean for chimney swifts and what's better and how to be better stewards, to inclusion of, data for permitting processes. We talked about Toronto a lot in this conversation, but it's not just Toronto. Truly, we have data for Halifax, we have data for Ottawa, and everywhere, few and far between. So we have a lot of this information out there already. We have access to knowing where chimney swifts are spending their time, and definitely room for growth there to improve our relationship within the community and get more accurate data and more up-to-date data. But while we do have this current data, it'd be so wonderful, and looking into the future, to have the goal of having this data be on some kind of municipal access, or having municipal access within this data, so that we can take those proactive stances towards conservation of chimney swifts, and everyone can learn how to, be a better chimney swift steward. So that being said, yeah, with bird friendly city, our communities, it would be really wonderful if we had kind of like a more streamlined process of us, using these resources and finding a place to share them with folks that are interested in being a more bird friendly municipality. And I think, yeah, we have some thanks to our partners, which, as you can see, a lot. We're pretty popular.
Some, but not all. Even there's a lot.
Exactly. Yeah. And then it was just Gabriel and I kind of doing the conversation today, but Natasha's here. I think Veronique is here. Riel is here, I believe, with the Maritime Swiftwatch. So a lot of really awesome folks are here that know more about it than Gabriel and I do. They've been around longer. Gabriel and I are surprisingly, depending on how well we did talk to you folks today. We've only been around for 2 weeks, but we really love chimney swifts. So we hope we did a good job in talking about them and sharing a bit about their biology and conservation status and how to help them. But yeah, we would love to hear from you folks, right now, or even if in the future, if you want to find us, you can message us or find us on social media or search any of our team members and learn more about how to conserve threatened species.
Yeah, no, we've got the whole team here with us, and we can open this up for questions. I've seen that there's been a few questions going on, and shout out to Riel for being on top of those and super quick to respond. That's great. And yeah, again, if you have any questions now, you can unmute yourself and ask, and one member of the team will answer. And then if you think of something later, our email is right at the top, and both Claire, Natasha, and I all have access to that email, so we can get back to you. I saw John, you put your hand up first, so if you want to ask your question, go ahead.
Sure. Yes, someone muted. So I actually just have a question generally about the chimney swifts distribution. Like, are they concentrated in the cities, or do they have a wider distribution across Ontario? Because I guess I'm just wondering how critical the city environment is for the overall population of chimney swifts.
That's a great question, John. I have seen chimney swifts all over the province, but when it comes to roosting and nesting, they're pretty heavily reliant on our artificial structures at this point. And while they can survive in other places, I think with the mass removal of those structures, they would really struggle to catch up. It takes up a significant portion. I think Natasha might know a little bit more on that if she has anything to add.
I do. Can you guys hear me? I'm on the phone. I haven't really done this before. Okay, great. Hi, all. Yeah, thanks so much, Claire and Gabe. That was a fantastic presentation. Really appreciated it. For urban centers, yes. typically chimney swifts we do see most of the congregation in those urban centers. So, places like Toronto, Ottawa, Halifax, like these larger cities. However, that does not at all make that exclusive at all. And so like, I'm just pulling up our Nature Counts database, which is where Birds Canada hosts all of our data. And in Ontario specifically, there's sites in Meaford or Wyerton, Kincardine, Orillia, Gravenhurst, all the way up, to like a little bit south of Huntsville. And then I'm sure Riel can talk about that more in like the Maritimes as well. And so we do see larger congregations and larger populations in these city centers just based on the availability of that habitat, that chimney population. However, that's not exclusive at all. And so even if it isn't a direct line of conserving the chimneys, there's still a lot that we can do for these birds if they're foraging like over 2 kilometers away outside of those city limits as well. So I hope that answers your question, but if not, let me know.
Thank you.
Perfect. And then Brendan, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, thanks for that presentation. Really informative. I've been monitoring chimney swifts locally where I live for the last few years, but I always learn more hearing from you guys. I have a few questions, but I don't want to take up too much time. So maybe I'll start with just one and then hand it over to somebody else. Maybe you can circle back to me afterwards. So my first question is, what do you think various levels of government, municipal, provincial, federal, should perhaps be doing differently to promote the conservation of the chimney swift and its habitat?
Yeah, I can take that one if that's helpful. I think the biggest thing for us right now is really this incorporation of data into municipal policy planning, which it has kind of been touched on in the presentation. Because as Claire was mentioning, a lot of the time right now, like we have a lot of data for like decades. Places like London and Ontario have even more of that data because they were kind of doing this first. And so this very reactive approach in terms of, there's a concerned volunteer that says, hey, I've monitored this chimney for a decade, and now I see that it has a demolition permit, there's construction going on, do you know what's happening? And then we have to follow up with, the permitting authorities, whether it's a provincial or federal level, and then send over the data, and then that might result in a fine for the landowner, unfortunately, or different mitigation measures, which isn't really fun for anybody. And so what I would like to see and what we're really hoping to bring to this conversation with bird-friendly cities is really this proactive approach. And so at the provincial, at the federal level, how are we going to incorporate this data into other bird-friendly city initiatives or just municipal permit policies? So we have this data, it gets incorporated either into like a GIS database for city planners, it gets incorporated into like an Excel sheet, whatever works. And when a permit comes through for construction of a chimney, it gets flagged if there's species at risk data, and then it's more proactive approach than reactive. So we're really proactively conserving this habitat. And I think Riel can probably talk about that because they've had a little bit more success actually in the Maritimes as well. I know the City of London is kind of already putting this in place. So it's a great example of how this is already working within their city planning department, that it's already happening. This data is already being incorporated, but I think Riel could probably talk about that a little bit in the Maritimes as well.
Yeah, I can touch on it a little bit. We haven't had to take action yet, but we've partnered with a few municipalities so far, and we've been able to share our known chimney swift sites in different cities and towns. And these municipalities have been able to add the points to their GIS systems. And so when they have a permit application come in, say to demolish a site or a building permit, it'll flag that property, and then they can connect with us at Birds Canada so we can discuss with the landowner what the appropriate next steps are. But it's an evolving process. We're hoping to get more municipalities on board.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll also jump into, sorry, I might be taking up a little bit of airspace. In the recovery strategy, so the federal recovery strategy for protection of the species, there is also a call to really increase that natural habitat, that's going to take a long time. And so if it comes to like forestry departments or natural heritage within municipalities, this is also an area that we think can really be helpful. So I think it's kind of a two-pronged approach where, number one, restoring sites to start regrowing those old growth forests so that chimney swifts might be less reliable on our chimneys in the future, and they can go back to that more natural habitat. But in the meantime, we still need to be protecting the habitat that's already existing. And so I think that's kind of the two-prong approach that I'd love to see at the provincial, municipal, federal level, and different, avenues of government to protect the species.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I found looking at the federal recovery strategies, not just for the chimney swift, but for the bank swallow and other species that seem to be somewhat dependent on artificial habitat at the moment. There's a real emphasis on natural habitat that may or may not exist today. And they seem to treat the artificial habitat as not ideal or perhaps unnecessary or understated otherwise. So that's really interesting that you say that. I would be curious to know more about how municipalities have kind of accounted for swifts using chimneys from like an actual policy perspective, as in if it's reflected in certain processes or bylaws, understanding at what point in the how does this manifest actually on paper in something that a city council would adopt and it would just become formulated in process. I think that's really important information to provide for other municipalities that might be looking for a model with which they can develop something comparable. Here in London, for example, we have what's called the environmental management guidelines. And anytime you carry out an environmental impact study or environmental assessment or anything comparable, it's a requirement that you need to go in, and by you, I mean an environmental consultant preparing a report. Part of the background review is go and check the citizen science databases. Go and see what's on iNaturalist, what's an eBird, and if there's species at risk, report that and make sure that that's included in the study design. I don't think they're necessarily checking Birds Canada having records of chimney swifts, but certainly there's a lot of awareness here of chimney swifts in general, and maybe there's a separate parallel process for permitting. The last thing I would just add about the natural habitat is I've never come across standards for how to recreate that natural habitat in a way that actually promotes its use by swifts. So as it was mentioned in the presentation, even if you were to have an old dead tree now, there's a very good likelihood you have squirrels and raccoons in there. And yet we have methods for excluding raccoons and squirrels from accessing structures where birds nest. But I'm not aware of if there's an old dead tree somewhere and they're thinking about cutting it down, what can we point to as a reference to say, here's how we could adapt this into swift habitat in the long term? I don't know if something like that exists. Anyways, that's it for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say, not to my knowledge, it doesn't exist. I think, unfortunately, we don't have those large swaths of old growth forests now in Eastern Canada for the most part, in the southern, in the range of chimney swifts to be able to do that research. There is natural habitat that is still being used. But it's few and far between. And so hopefully eventually we can get to the spot where we're able to, offer some guidance on what restoration would actually look like for a natural habitat. But in the meantime, I think the goal of kind of protecting the artificial habitat of chimneys right now is kind of the goal.
Yeah, that makes sense. If I may ask just quickly a related question, these birds overwinter in Central South America, and I don't know what the chimney situation is down there. Are those birds relying on natural habitat in that part of their range?
Yes, that was something that we intended to touch on, and I'm glad you brought it up, because they're also negatively affected by the mass deforestation that takes place in a lot of Central and South America, because they're heavily reliant on those large scale old growth forests that would also contribute to rainforest habitat as well. So that's where they're spending their winters, I believe. All right, Jamie, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I thought these Swift-friendly property signs were a great idea. If a business or homeowner had a chimney was being used by Swifts, and they wanted to get a hold of one of these, how would they go about applying? And I think it would be a great idea just for public awareness.
Hi, Jamie. I answered your question in the chat there. So if folks want to scroll up, I can drop the link in the main chat as well. So these signs are meant for folks that are taking some stewardship action. So they're protecting their chimney or kind of making an informal agreement to continue keeping that space for swifts. It's not just like a sign that says, yeah, birds are here. It needs to be people that are taking some stewardship action. But I will drop the link in the chat there. They just have to fill out that form there and we'll mail them a sign.
Okay. So someone who did have Swifts and wanted to make sure they were doing the right things should contact you.
Yeah, and we have a lot of resources actually on this same page. There are several resources for homeowners and building owners.
Great. Sorry, I didn't see the response in the chat there. But,
No worries.
I guess the other question was whether the outreach, again, wonderful stuff. Do you go beyond Toronto and offering sessions, workshops?
So yes, actually, yeah, Natasha is going to be doing a workshop in Guelph for bird-friendly gardening, which is kind of ties in with aerial insectivore conservation. And I know Riel's done a lot of events out in the Maritimes. Claire and I's point of data focus for our field surveys are in Toronto this season. So of course, there's a lot of focus on us working there right now. But for Birds Canada and aerial insectivore conservation, I know that events have been hosted in all kinds of different municipalities.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to touch on, what Gabriel was saying. Like Gabriel mentioned, our research right now is focused on Western GTA. But for outreach, that's across Ontario. We're just centered here. Gabriel's actually in Guelph. I'm based out of Toronto. And that being said, my dad's in Muskoka and I have family in Perth. And I know that in all those areas, there are also chimney swifts. So if there's any need for resources or, if you have any ideas on how to engage folks in your community, we'd still love for you to reach out. It's Ontario Swiftwatch. It's across the whole province, not just GTA. So we'd love to see how we can help out and engage on any kind of help out with any events or anything that you might have planned, any kind of Zoom meeting or anything in particular. Feel free to reach out and we'd love to see how we can best support.
Good. So just an email to the Ontario Swiftwatch or to a particular person on your team?
Ontario Swiftwatch will get it to me, Natasha, and Claire. So we can post that email in the chat just so that everyone has it. And if anyone needs to reach out after this, please feel free.
Great. Thanks very much.
For the Maritime folks too, it's Mar Swiftwatch. And I think Riel will be able to post that as well for us covering, Ontario all the way east to the Maritimes. And we do have staff also working in the Ottawa area, and then we have connections in Quebec as well.
I was just wondering, where can we find your data from the summer in Toronto? I also saw Ottawa on that map, and I would love to check out some of those locations and see if I can add to some of the Swiftwatch data in the area, because I haven't actually seen many in downtown Ottawa, so I was happy to see some pins on the map there.
Yeah, you can sign up to be a volunteer on Nature Counts. So I think we can drop another. There should be on Zoom an area just for dropped references. But we can drop another reference to the Nature Counts website where you can sign up for the Swift and Swallow program. And yeah, you can see from there, after you create an account, you can see where there have previously been sites. You can add a new site in or reach out to us and we'll add a new site in if there's not currently a site in there. And yeah, we would love to hear more about Ottawa and what's going on there.
You can even email us and send us where your rough location is, because we do have sites not just in Toronto, but across the province and different provinces that we want to survey for critical habitat. And there are some in Ottawa as well to update that database for the recovery strategy. So just send us your general location and we'll be able to kind of point you in the right direction for some priority sites.
That sounds great. Thank you all.
Did Brendan have
Brendan.
another question?
Yeah, I have one more question. I have distributed a number of those signs in London, and something that we struggle with a little bit here is there are properties where Swifts have historically used the chimney, and we're not sure if the property owner is yet aware that they have Swifts. And if we provide them with information, that there's a chance that they're going to go, oh, I don't want birds in my chimney. And then they're going to take action that actually harms the Swifts. And so we're always a bit on the fence about, do we approach them? Do we just kind of let sleeping dogs lie? Do you have any suggestions of best practice just to make sure that we're not unintentionally causing harm?
That's a great question. I've only had the pleasure of interacting with members of the community who are eager to conserve their chimneys and work with chimney swifts. And I think Natasha might have more experience speaking with possible negative responses to having the birds present.
Brendan, you always have the best questions. But yeah, it's a great thought. And as with everything species at risk, we do try to strike that balance and find, what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate. We know that with the federal recovery strategy being proposed, it's public. And so the list of all critical habitat sites that have been identified for the current recovery strategy are public. We are also in the process of updating that. And so that kind of takes away a little bit of that gray area, I guess, when it comes to identifying that site and the landowners if they didn't know it was there. At Birds Canada, we generally feel like, there might be that risk, and there has been that risk in the past with approaching a landowner and sharing that, and it hasn't gone well. That is a reality. At the same time, we kind of assume that there might actually be a larger risk to not doing that, because we've seen at least, multiple times where a property has been, like a chimney has been removed or it's been capped, and then, the authorities are following up with them and letting them know, like, hey, you actually destroyed critical habitat, that's an issue, and they had no idea, and they were remorseful, and they would have done something if they knew about it. And so I guess it's a situation based on how you feel about the landowner, but overall, it does potentially seem like there is more risk to not sharing that information than there is with sharing it and seeing a potential negative outcome. At the same time, if a site has been occupied by swifts on 2 different days, and you've seen swifts enter on 2 different days, then it is protected critical habitat. And so that does offer that level of protection, even if they do know and they would like to take that, that chimney down. So definitely a gray area, but we hope that with the sharing is caring approach.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, so I was just kind of wondering whether changes could be made into the different criteria for bird-friendly cities to be assessed by including something that would have chimney swifts involved in it, or something very kind of specific like that, because it seems to be a quite unique from all the other situations. I don't think any of the other ones kind of really cover the needs of chimney swifts. So maybe it's something that could be done in the future with regards to the checklist. I don't know. Autumn.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is actually something that Claire and I have kind of brainstormed about specifically, and we also think that it would be a really beneficial thing to add to the registration process of burn-friendly cities, to specifically single out the conservation needs of chimney swifts, because they're so unique. It is a difficult balance because no other specific species are listed as like a priority within those. It's a more general, how can we conserve all at once? But like we've kind of been talking about most of this meeting, chimney swifts are kind of in this really unique situation where, as a specialist with conservation, more often than not, you just focus on habitat restoration. And once you turn the habitat, the species will grow. But with chimney swifts, the habitat is so fragmented and so privately owned by so many different people, especially in urban centers, that it becomes a more complicated and more intersectional issue to solve, and something that Bird Friendly Cities is uniquely equipped to kind of single out. That if we can get bird friendly city initiatives involved and municipalities involved to kind of govern the bodies of everyone who owns these private properties of critical habitat, then it becomes less of an issue of restoration and more of an issue of preservation.
Okay. And maybe especially just in light of its decline in population, it's just so severe right now that maybe it has to be given a top priority and have greater focus on that. That's it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Does anyone else have anything to add on there? I know I went on a little ramble.
No, I thought that was incredibly well said. Yeah, I think, like Gabe was saying, chimney swifts, it's almost easier to include because we have the data. It's tied with people's houses or industry or schools or municipalities or churches. And so it's almost an easier way to include in the bird friendly city guidelines than something like, I don't know, like in others, like Western meadow or Eastern meadowlark, for example, where it's like grassland habitat as a whole. And so chimney swifts offer a little bit more of that ease of access. They're a little bit of a gateway bird. So if we're thinking about the overall goals of stewardship and habitat protection, chimney swifts seem like kind of an easier addition to the bird friendly city guidelines as a whole. But I know I'm not gonna say, yeah, for sure do it, because of course there's a lot of conversations that I imagine have to be had within Nature Canada as well of what that looks like as a whole. But we are very much of the opinion of we're happy to support wherever.
Brendan, again, come on in.
I just wanted to add to that discussion about incorporating chimney swifts into the bird friendly city criteria. I think it's a wonderful idea. I actually have thought about this, but more broadly as a set of resources or criteria concerning aerial insectivores in general, because I think there's a lot of knowledge that exists in communities like Birds Canada that I think could be made more broadly applicable through the Bird Friendly Cities program. For example, barn swallows are very widely distributed, and current best management practice, according to the province, involves using really outdated methods to put a little hut on the side of wherever you're destroying habitat and call it a day. And we know for certain that those don't seem to work that well. And yet there are designs for structures that seem to be more effective based on research. Birds Canada actually provided me with schematics for exactly that purpose. And it would be wonderful, I think, to put that in the hands of municipalities. So when they're designing compensation for habitat loss associated with development, they have an internal standard they can refer people to. Ditto for bank swallows, right? Like there's a lot of work that happens that destroys habitat, whether it's artificial, like in aggregate land, or we're talking about, you know, a riparian area where there's stuff. These municipalities where they'll kind of defer to the province, but sometimes the provincial guidance is not that great either. So having this be incorporated, I think, makes a lot of sense. Even if it's not a mandatory condition, somehow reflected through the Bird Friendly Cities program, here are resources of best practice or tools or examples, things that the bird teams can have access to help them advocate more effectively on a per project basis.
Yeah, we definitely have, I'd say, quite a bit of expertise when it comes to like habitat outreach stewardship for a variety of species. So this does for sure go beyond chimney swifts as a whole. We have specialist teams that are looking at wetlands and marshes, more northern habitats like loon protection. We have the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, which is a 5-year partnership with Birds Canada and multiple others, where we're mapping the distribution of breeding birds across the entire province. And these atlases also happen in different provinces and territories as well. And so it does go beyond Chimney Swifts in terms of the data that we're able to provide. And Nature Counts as Birds Canada's database, I don't want to say it wrong, but I think it's like the biggest database when it comes to Canadian, natural data when it comes to like birds. But we also do have like marsh monitoring programs that include frogs as well. And so we have a lot of data, we have a lot of expertise within our team, and we're always happy to support across Canada, not just in Ontario, when it comes to sharing those resources and that data.
Does anyone else have any more questions? I know it's Friday, so people are starting to to probably hit the Friday jitters, ready to log off or go about our weekends. But it's been really great talking to people, and thank you for everyone that's made, comments in the chat and about having it be a good presentation. It really means a lot, and yeah, it's exciting. I don't know why these things always feel so intimidating for some time, but then you start, you're like, oh, everyone just cares about conservation and doing better for the environment. So I don't know where the intimidation comes from whenever you get to be around really awesome people like y'all. So
yeah. This has been a great conversation, and it's been awesome to talk to you guys and all of your expertise, and hopefully the conversation doesn't end here, but yeah, I'll hand it back to Autumn.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us today, Natasha. I'm so sorry that I tried to unpin you and accidentally clicked report instead of unpin. So you had to join by your phone, but I'm glad that we got that all sorted. And I hope that everyone learned a lot. I'm definitely going to sign up for a Nature Counts account and find those Ottawa locations and hopefully add some data to that. But thank you, Claire and Gabrielle and Natasha and Rael and Veronique. Thank you all for joining us today, and everyone take care.
Autumn, real quick before you go,